Once again, an issue of housing. We're hearing about ships, cruise ships. What else is going on with this?
So there's a number of things happening. With respect to the distribution of commodities, that is the biggest challenge right now. But the restoration of power is also a big challenge, and I'll tell you why. Energy here, electric power, is supplying the hospitals that are providing medical care to the wounded and those that brought medical conditions and had chelation needs and other needs. So there's a kind of a dual priority going on in terms of power restoration, emergency power, and then blocking, clearing, pushing out of the way all the roads to open them up so we can get commodities delivered. There's still a shortfall there, though, and that is drivers for all those trucks. So we are pushing personnel in to augment state and local authorities to continue to push those commodities. What you saw today, though, I think was some reporting and some loop footage of some trucks sitting on ports and docks. We're moving those trucks quickly. We're also prioritizing what needs to come off first so that we can get generators.
Would airdrops circumvent all of that, having to rebuild infrastructure, move things away?
Yeah, at this point, if airdrops are under consideration, I'm not aware of it, but I would promote it if it's a faster way to get food and water to people who are in need. We now have a, a one-star general, General Kim, in place, who's in charge of all ground force operations to make sure there's one person in charge of marshaling all those efforts. And if he recommends airdrop, then I think we airdrop. Sir?
I've got a text here from a volunteer who has boots on the ground, and he says that they need helicopters to evacuate people from remote areas of the island. And he says there are people burying their family members in front yards. Communication is badly needed, and they look at apocalyptic conditions between 48 and 72 hours. There's a little bit of disconnect from what I'm hearing here and what they're telling me there. Can you explain the difference?
Yeah, no, there's no disconnect. If that's accurate, then it needs to be those decisions under the right command and leadership structure. What we've done, and as I've explained in the past, is we've had to augment and change our business model in the field. We did that last Thursday in earnest. You saw the effects of it over the weekend. But what we did is said we had to augment the local and state authorities, not just at the top, but all the way out through and to the lower level. So now there are federal officials that are identifying needs and requirements, requesting them of the state level, augmenting the state level to validate those requirements, and then from the federal side providing them. So we are in every stage of the identification, validation, and provision of requirements and the delivery of them to people in need. And a couple of things here. First, people seeing 24 and 48-hour horizon problems where they're saying, I don't see enough food and water coming. It's my sincere belief that that food and water is going to get to them before that deadline arises, and then we're going to save their lives. I have no doubt in it. We've got over 10,000 people there now, and there's more on their way, including a lot of aerial support, USS Comfort. I'm going to read the numbers here for you. There's 12 Coast Guard cutters, 3 United States Navy ships, 1 DOT Maritime Administration vessel, 6 commercial ships with supplies en route. This was as of 5 a.m., so there's more since. 7 additional ships to house responders. And we've got commodities distribution now exceeding millions, so 1.3 million meals, 2.7 million liters, that type of thing of water. So that's moving in today, and you're seeing the distribution problem unclogged. Now, if there's somebody burying somebody in their front yard, that's an absolutely terrible story. What I don't want to do, though, is project it as the norm. And I think there's a careful distinction here. Right now, we've seen 16 fatalities confirmed from the state authorities. No fatalities acceptable. If that number increases significantly, that will be a devastating blow. We are doing everything we can to prevent that. Loss of life from the storm is one thing. Loss of life that's preventable is another, and that's why we're trying to marshal our resources. Ma'am?
Senator Rubio, who just got back from the island, says there are significant logistical concerns with the administration's response. He says there's no clear command, control, and communication between local and federal agencies, and he says this requires a response led by DOD. Is that option on the table here?
Sure, it's already been undertaken. So I was with the senator briefly on Monday in Puerto Rico, and I think what he's identifying there is something that we already had in place a solution for. So he's identifying a traditional problem between municipal and state government authorities. Normally FEMA and the federal government would provide aid to the governor, to the state, and then they would work it out with the local authorities. What we've identified here as of last Thursday, and you saw it implemented over the weekend, was a lack of capacity coupled with this insular, several hundred-mile away, divided by an ocean island problem. And so what we've done is provided federal authorities, largely guys in green, right, Title 10 and Title 32 forces, but also FEMA emergency managers, to stand next to each of those municipality leaders, whether they're mayors or local authority figures like the Water Authority or Electric Authority leaders, and they're being augmented by federal forces. So we've addressed those challenges in communicating between local and state authorities by augmenting them with federal staff. That's something that wasn't necessarily apparent to the senator as he got there. He identified a problem, but it was a problem already being fixed, and it's one that he probably wasn't able to see at the municipal level for two reasons. One, he didn't get out there to them. Neither of us could make it out to the municipal levels when we visited on Monday. And two, there was a communications problem of grave import that persists to this day. And that communications problem is tied to the electric power restoration problem. So if I could, before I take the next question, let me explain why and how the power restoration process is unfolding. What we decided to do is take the action of putting the United States Army Corps of Engineers in charge of power restoration on the island. So to your question about whether the military is in charge, it depends on the mission and function. They're in charge of a lot, but not everything. The people of Puerto Rico are strong, competent, and where they're not diminished in capacity, they're in charge, and that's the best way to handle things. But where they're not able and where they have diminished capacity, we're taking extreme steps. So a direct federal assistance order was given, a mission assignment was given. I've heard others on TV quibble whether it's a mission or not. We make it clear, General Semonite from the United States Army Corps of Engineers has been given a mission to restore power on Puerto Rico, writ large, full stop. He has some priorities. His priorities are temporary power generation right now. That's the big diesel run generators that are supporting the hospitals and other life-saving capabilities. 2, permanent generation. He's going to restore the damaged power generation capacity on the south of the island. 3, transmission. Those are the big lines that transmit power to and from. And then 4thly, distribution. That's the last mile capillaries hook up to the houses and that type of power generation. So those are his priorities. And I'm pretty certain that the Puerto Rican people are going to see the results of the dedicated Army Corps of Engineers mission. Ma'am?
Several aid flights have gotten out of South
I'm going to call it, yes, ma'am.
If airdrops would help, why are those not happening? Is that a military issue? Is that a problem with them not stepping up?
Yeah, it's my belief right now that both the state government and most of the municipalities involved have identified the fastest route as available to them, being ground-based. If that's not the case, then I'm confident, but I want to make sure that I don't step in between something that I could be far removed from. If the ground force commander down there has identified an airdrop mission as faster and more productive, then I endorse it from here. I certainly wouldn't question his judgment. But it was my reporting understanding earlier today that they identified the fastest delivery methodology to be through ground-based means by clearing first and delivering second, and that we needed drivers and we're augmenting them, and they needed security forces, and we've applied those. There's a security force plan now laid down for each of the drivers so that they can feel safe.
Tom, several aid flights have gotten out of South Florida and managed to get to the island and deliver food and water without having logistical problems. There's severe criticism coming from South Florida now, saying that there's mismanagement coming all the way from the president.
Yeah.
How do you respond to that?
Yeah. Well, I'm not certain who you're talking about or who's criticizing us. There's plenty of criticism to go around, but I'm pretty confident.
Managed to get an aid flight into the island and get it unloaded, and he says the problems that you're having logistically are of your own making from not taking action sooner and bringing in the military sooner.
Well, first, I thank the mayor for providing aid. Second, the mayor's just dead wrong in this case, and I would challenge him to go down and get a better understanding first before rendering that verdict on what we've done, what we have been doing, and how blown away you're going to be when you see the full totality of the picture. So I'm certain that the mayor's had some positive experiences. I wouldn't be critical of him personally, but he's probably, just like with the Jones Act criticism that he rendered, just not yet informed on the facts. So.
The president has referenced some of the debt and economic problems that Puerto Rico has been struggling with for some time here. When you were talking about the lack of capacity, municipal and state level, I mean, are you faulting local officials for a lack of preparedness?
No, absolutely. No. Let me be clear. When I say capacity, I'm talking about the capacity problem of people being victims that would otherwise be the first responders, repairers, and managers of the municipal government functions. So what we're doing is trying to restore baseline municipal government functions because they've been affected. Their homes are destroyed, their families are put in peril. That's the capacity problem that I'm addressing. When you talk about money, I believe that the island authority in general was Puerto Rico, $72 billion in debt. There's a restructuring effort underway. Congress weighed in with the PROMESA Act, and that $72 billion is being restructured and handled through, in part, bankruptcy proceedings and so forth. So,
how is that impacting this response? Because the president brought it up.
Well, I think I know the president brought it up in terms of recovery, but here's how it affects the response. What it does is it puts the island in a position where they don't have the financial resources to meet the cost share requirement for all of these goods and resources, personnel, material flowing into the island. What the president did was acknowledge that publicly and privately, realize that that would be a problem at the advice of the FEMA administrator, myself, and Secretary Duke, and he took the step of doing a 100% federal cost share adjustment to pay for all of this, from debris removal, debris pushing, power restoration, the Army Corps of Engineers, and all the emergency protective measures, police, fire, EMS, truck drivers, all those sorts of things, 180 days, so 6 months for the Virgin Islands and for Puerto Rico until we can get our hands around this. All of those functions, all those missions that I just described are all 100% federal cost share. We don't want anybody worried about paper. We want them worried about people. I'm going to take 2 more questions. So, sir, I
wanted to follow that a little bit and ask, as you're starting to envision down the road, if any sort of bailout might be part of the sort of broader recovery package that you look for in supplemental. And on that supplemental, I know the first crack at it will be relatively soon. Aides on Capitol Hill are suggesting that it could be the first week in October. Is that the timeline that you're anticipating?
Yeah,
you started to compile that.
As my colleague, Mr. Cohen, alluded to, we're certainly willing to negotiate with Congress if there's some better fiscal idea. From an emergency management perspective in the next coming weeks, it's important to understand that FEMA just got a $7.1 billion appropriation released on October 1st. And what's going to happen now is we're going to go back for more. We're going to ask for that in the form of an emergency supplemental to provide money into the fund that does this life-saving, life-sustaining effort and even some of the early recovery efforts. Whether we have to address or should address at that point their existing $72 billion worth of debt and how it's been restructured is something that I'll have to take my lead from the economists on and from some of the budget hawks. But I think that the best idea here for us would be to focus on PROMESA and PRASA, the Electric Power Authority and the Water Authority. Those are the 2 concerning elements where they're going to have to be rebuilt. They're going to have to be rebuilt under proper management, and they're going to have to be rebuilt under proper rebuilding codes and standards to make sure that they can withstand a future hurricane and that we don't just go back to sticks and wires in the future. So we're going to put federal money into this. We should do it wisely and prudently. I've said that from this podium here before. President Trump believes in that seriously. I don't think we're going to have to address the debt restructuring issue in this next go-around, but if we do, and if Congress wants us to, President Trump's up to that challenge. I'm going to
supplemental.
Well, it's going to have to come, I think, in the next 2 to 4 weeks, but I can't put a better date on it. I'd refer you to Director Mulvaney. Let me take one more question here.
I'm not sure if I still understand. Why has it taken 8 days to get a 3-star general on the ground to start organizing this? We know the island situation, et cetera, but why 8 days?
Yeah, well, because it didn't require a 3-star general 8 days ago. Let me explain to you how the process works. It'll be the best way of explaining the answer. We have a 3-star general in charge of this, and we had one in charge of this out of San Antonio from day -8 and day -2 and all the way through until today. We forward deployed a 1-star general, a brigadier general, to take care of ground force command once we realized the problem of logistics distribution had outstripped the capacity of the affected municipal governments. But that 3-star general was there and running and coordinating operations as an extension of NORAD, Northern Command. We've made a number of improvements to that distribution process and that marshaling of military resources since, for instance, General Honore experienced the problems he did in Katrina. We've matured quite a bit since that day. The 3-star command structure that he lacked back then has been put in place and has been in place for this response out of San Antonio and augmented by a Northern Command structure that's been pretty robust and forward-leaning here. They've been doing vocal authorities. They're not waiting for paperwork. They've been doing things that are on command authority. They don't wait for a governor's request. So all those forward-leaning lessons have been applied here, perhaps misunderstood. But now the changed move here on day 8 was to take that 3-star general and to put him there physically located in the field. I don't anticipate he'll stay there long, but he needs to get there, have his eyes on it, and make sure that he's comfortable with the interaction between his forces and the governor and the municipal forces, because it's a little bit of a different business plan model in the field and because it's unique and it's an island 1,100 or so miles away from the nearest land in Florida. And so once he's satisfied, I think, or would expect that 3-star general to recede back into his appropriate command structure. But for now, both he and his 1-star subordinate command will be there in charge of ground forces and overall military marshal. And we'll end up with a lot more people there over the coming days to try to address this really significant problem and significant need And if that's okay, I'd like to make that my last question.
San Antonio is thousands of miles from Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
Why was it a mistake? Would you acknowledge it was a mistake looking back to not have this 3-star general on the ground earlier?
No, not at all. In fact, that doesn't affect the way we stage equipment and the way we handle area command and field operational commands. This is textbook, and it's been done well. The unusual step has been to put the 3-star general down forward leaning. So I have every confidence that we'll handle that in the best way possible. And Peter, if I could, John, I'm going to see if that's my last question. If I can, as I always do, I'm going to end by saying I'd like everyone to say an extra special prayer. Peer workers, businessmen and others, men and women that are helping those in need. Honestly, this is something that is going to require weeks and months worth of patience as we restore power, get food and water, and return to normalcy. So thank you so much for your time. I'm very proud of the Puerto Rican people, their strength and leadership, and Governor Rosello has our full confidence and faith. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. We're running kind of long today, so I'll jump straight into questions, and we'll try to take a few before we have to cut off for today. Steve?
Is the President looking any further into Tom Price's use of a private plane, and is he taking any steps to crack down on this practice?
Look, as the President said yesterday, he's not thrilled, certainly not happy with the actions. We're definitely looking at the issue. They're conducting both an internal and an IG full review. But to be clear, also, the White House does not have a role on the front end of approving private charter flights at the agencies, and that's something that we're certainly looking into from this point forward, and have asked a halt be put, particularly at HHS, on any private charter flights moving forward until those reviews are completed. Sure.
Does Secretary Price expect to keep his job in this administration?
I think the President's addressed this yesterday. We're going through this process. We're going to conduct a full review, and we'll see what happens. Justin.
Can I ask two things? The first, the President has 6 times over the last couple of days said that a senator is in the hospital. I think that's a reference to Senator Cochran, who's not in the hospital. And the reason that this is a relevant question is that the President said that they have the votes for the health care bill to pass. So can you tell us what senator he's referring to, and if it is Senator Cochran, why, if the votes exist, the Senate isn't voting on that now?
Look, our understanding is that the senator was physically unable to be here this week to actually participate in a vote. We're glad that he's fully recuperating. The point that we're making is that we have the votes on the substance, but not necessarily on the process, which is why we're still confident that we can move health care forward and get it done in the spring.
And the second thing is, obviously, if the President didn't support Roy Moore in the primary, but he's moved to kind of warmly embrace him since then. But I guess what I'm wondering is, Judge Moore has made a series of controversial comments saying homosexual conduct should be illegal, equating being gay to bestiality, saying that a lawmaker who's Muslim shouldn't be allowed to serve. I'm wondering why those comments shouldn't disqualify him from a presidential endorsement, particularly considering that on the campaign trail, the President promised to be advocates for those groups.
As we've said many times before, I'm not going to get into back and forth on political endorsements from the podium, so I'm not going to weigh in on a specific race ahead of time at this point. Matthew.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I want to follow up on that because, as you mentioned, Judge Moore, homosexuality should be illegal. He said that Sandy Hook was some sort of divine retribution. He said Keith Ellison should not be permitted to serve in Congress because he's a Muslim. So without asking about the specifics of the race, does President Trump share any of those views that I just mentioned? And if not, why does he think this person is fit to be a U.S. Senator?
Not that I'm aware of. I have not taken a deep dive on every comment that the senator or the Senate nominee has made, but I certainly know where the President stands on those issues and wouldn't see any parallel between the two of them on that front.
Are there any beliefs a candidate could hold or actions a candidate could take that if he were still a Republican, the President would not endorse him?
I'm not going to get into every potential hypothetical that any potential candidate may or may not have over the course of the time that the President is the President. I know where the President stands on specific issues. That's what I can speak about, not somebody else that's a candidate for another office that's not here. Anita.
Sarah,
Go ahead.
I think that was
Anita.
it.
Yeah.
I didn't get to, Tom did not call on me, so I'm going to ask the question I wanted to understand. He mentioned in response to what Senator Rubio was saying, asking the Pentagon to be in charge, that the Pentagon is in charge of a lot, but not everything. I still don't understand why it's not in charge of everything, or what the response will be to Senator Rubio, who sent a letter over to the president today.
Again, we're continuing to work with state officials, including the governor, who, as Tom said, we have confidence in, but we're supplementing and augmenting that with federal resources, including over 10,000 federal employees and a one-star general that's there on the ground on that front.
One entity in charge, I guess, is the question. He said many people were in charge of different things. Why is one person not in charge, or one entity?
Well, I believe one person is in charge of different parts of this process. The governor is still the governor of Puerto Rico. We're continuing to work with them, be in constant contact, and we have one person in charge of the federal component of that, and that would be the one-star general on the ground working with state officials.
Sarah, two questions. One, I know you said the White House doesn't approve charter flights ahead of time, but generally speaking, given the focus of the president on cost saving, like he said, he wanted not just drain the swamp, but he wanted people to spend money in more responsible ways. Is there a policy of the administration for government employees and cabinet members to try to fly commercial? Do they have any guidance? Were they given any guidance as to how they should be traveling?
Yeah, we're looking into that. When it comes to military aircraft, that's a part where the White House does actually play a role. And on that front, the Trump administration has actually authorized far fewer flights for senior government officials than the Obama administration did during the same time period. And so we're continuing to look at ways to bring that back under the places where the White House has that direct control and authority, which is under military aircraft, which we've cut back significantly at this point.
I just want to follow up on the Roy Moore comments. I know you don't want to talk about the race, but from the podium, do you want to at least condemn some of those sentiments that you said the president
answer for?
Yeah.
Jeff.
One more question on Secretary Price's flight. You said the White House was not aware of it, but on at least one of those flights, a senior advisor, Kellyanne Conway, was flying with him on the private flight. Are you looking into that one specifically to see if the White House knew about that?
I didn't say we weren't aware. I said the White House doesn't authorize those private charter flights. Again, we're doing a full, not just of that flight, but an internal review at HHS of all private charter flights, as well as an IG review that will be conducted of all of them, not just any one particular flight. So that'll be very thorough. Julie?
Follow up. If the president, as he's watching this coverage in Puerto Rico, is he satisfied with what he sees as the response here? Is he satisfied with what he's hearing from his advisors, or would he like to see things moving along faster, as some of people on the ground have asked for?
The president wants to continue to do everything we can to protect the safety and security of the people, both at the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. We're continuing to do that, as Tom spoke very in depth about that process and what it looks like. That's our focus. That's what we're going to be continuing to do. People first, paperwork second. The president has empowered all of his agencies to go forward with that mindset, and that's what we're going to continue to do. Julie?
I saw that Secretary Price was here today for an event with the First Lady. Did the President have the chance to sit down and talk with him about this issue of his private jet use, or has he had a one-on-one conversation with the Secretary about that? And when you said that the White House has ordered a halt on all of these flights, is that administration-wide, White House people, every agency? You said particularly with regard to HHS?
That's specific to HHS. I don't know that they spoke today, but I know they have spoken about this issue previously. I don't believe the President saw the Secretary at any point today, though.
So then following up on that, does the President believe, or does anyone at the White House think that there has been a tone set at the top here that has allowed cabinet members to feel empowered to be able to take private jet flights when they're going on official travel? I mean, we now have the HHS Secretary, the EPA Administrator, the Treasury Secretary took a flight on a private jet in an itinerary that's widely available commercially. Is there something that the President has said or done to set this tone that this is okay? And what is
not at all? And I think the President's been clear about what his position is by stating very clearly that he is not thrilled with the airplane use at this point. Catherine?
Two things. One, I just want to make sure I understand the
extent of the review process here into Price and others? You said there's an IG review, there's an HHS review. Is there a White House component? And is Price being looked at, or is anyone who's been accused of?
For HHS specifically, they're conducting an internal review as well as an IG review. The White House is looking at more of an overall, not specific to that department, because there's already 2 reviews taking place there.
Okay, also, Sarah, the president said that he would donate personal funds, I think $1 million, to Harvey relief. Is he making any kind of personal donation to Puerto Rico?
I haven't talked to him specifically about that, but he didn't make a donation to Harvey Relief. He made a donation to relief organizations, the Red Cross and many others that are part of all of the hurricanes that we've experienced over the last several weeks. And so those organizations aren't limited to a specific, nor those donations, a specific storm, but they go to those organizations that are helping aggressively and intensely in the recovery efforts in the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico as well. Peter.
A couple housekeeping things. One, we saw Steve Scalise with that emotional remarks at the House chamber today. Did the president speak to him today or yesterday to welcome him back? And can you tell us about that conversation?
I know they did speak today. I don't have many details on that, but I'll see if I can get something. But I know he certainly welcomed him back and reminded him that we'll continue to keep he and his family in our prayers for a full recovery.
A couple other quick items. Given the extent of the disaster in Puerto Rico right now, is the president considering delaying his trip there scheduled for next Tuesday?
As of right now, we feel comfortable with the president taking a trip on Tuesday. If there were any indication that it would halt or disrupt recovery or relief efforts, we would certainly reconsider and pull that trip back. But at this time, the folks on the ground have indicated that it would be helpful for him to be there.
Then finally, has Jared Kushner or Ivanka Trump or any other White House staff member taken a private plane ride since they're joining this administration, or been given access in some form to ride along somebody else on a private plane?
I'm not sure about those 2 specific individuals. Have to look.
I'd like to ask about Cuba. The CBS is reporting that the U.S. is prepared to announce a major withdrawal of staff and families from the embassy in Havana. Is there anything you can tell us about that, and how would you describe the relationship between Cuba and the U.S. right now?
At this point, I'm not going to weigh in on the Cuba stuff and get ahead of any potential action that may take place there, so I don't have anything new to add.
Cuba says it warned the U.S. against taking any, quote, hasty actions in a response to these incidents happening in Havana targeting diplomats. How does the U.S. respond to that?
Again, we haven't taken any action at this point that I'm going to weigh into any further. When we do that, we'll let you know, but I can assure you that our goal will be on the focus of what's best for this country, not what's best for Cuba. John Decker.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. The president, as you know, has said that players who kneel or take a knee during the national anthem ought to be fired. And you yourself have said from the podium in response to a very critical tweet by an ESPN anchor that that individual ought to be fired. You said it was a fireable offense, which brings me to Secretary Price. His extensive use by these private jets, why is that not a fireable offense? That's my first question. And has he offered to reimburse the government? In any way for his use of those private jets?
We're understanding that many of the NFL players are still very upset with this back and forth.
I think so are many Americans, far more Americans than there are NFL players.
Can I finish my question, please? Sure. Thank you. Many NFL players are very upset. Many people had different ideas and opinions on this, but when the president weighed in, the NFL said we're going to be united. There is an anticipation that it could grow even more so this weekend. What is the president anticipating? What should we expect him to say about this? It's now the NFL against the president.
I think the president's made very clear this shouldn't be about the NFL being against the president. This should be about our country coming together to support the flag, support the national anthem. There's nothing wrong with having pride in the United States. This president's been very clear on that, and he's certainly not going to back away from it.
Okay, so the NFL players, what we're hearing, it's not about not having pride. They're saying they're patriots. They love this country, but they're challenging the system, and they're looking at history like the challenge of of the system when it came to women's rights issues as well as civil rights. What does the president say when you look at history and see how people love this country but wanted to challenge the system to make it better?
I think if we're going to look at history, we should look at the thousands of Americans who have given their life to protect that flag, to protect that anthem. We should be celebrating those people. I gave you a chance to answer. I'm going to finish your statement. We should be looking at every way we can to celebrate our country, bring it together, not looking at ways to divide it. The president is simply talking about what we're for, not about what we're against. And certainly this administration will always be for protection and celebration of the flag and the national anthem, and that's not going to change.
Sarah, wait a minute, to clarify.
Guys,
Sarah, 1 second, just to clarify on that.
I don't think there's much to clarify.
Yes,
I think
it
was pretty,
this is a big
pretty
issue
black
that's
and white there.
People are very divided on this issue. It is a racial issue for some people, and the question is, when the military issue is brought in, the military goes and fights for the freedoms of this nation, and the players are saying they are thankful for the military service to allow them to have the freedoms to do this. I mean, is there some kind of confusion here, or is it us versus them kind of scenario?
It certainly shouldn't be. As I've said several times before, this isn't an us versus them. This should be something that brings our country together. These are symbols of what our country stands for, and this should be the opposite of what that is. This should be a very unifying moment when the national anthem plays. All Americans should be proud to stand up, salute that flag, salute that anthem, and be part of that process. Go ahead.
Follow on that. The president this morning said he believes NFL team owners are afraid of their players. What did he mean by that?
Probably the backlash of the players and the stance that they're making, and not wanting to create that conflict within their team. The president is here to lead the country. He feels very strongly about this, as do most Americans, because they certainly agree with him, as we've seen not just in the public support, but also in public polling on that very, very specific issue. Jerome?
It has been 4 days since Angela Merkel was re-elected in Germany. Has the president found time to talk to her?
I believe they spoke either yesterday morning or this morning, and we have a readout coming on that, and we'll make sure you guys get that.
Thank you very much. Follow up just quickly, 2 quick questions. Follow up on the NFL thing. I may not be the brightest guy in the room. Wait a minute, don't say anything.
You said it.
Don't say anything. But my question is...
But nobody else argued either, so...
Nobody's going to argue. But I really don't understand. I understand that he's saying you should stand up. But if a guy's sitting there going, I don't want to stand up, he still recognizes he has a First Amendment right not to, yes? It's his opinion. He's not, or is he asking us to carve out an exception to the First Amendment for freedom of expression?
No, we're not looking for an exception. I think the president's been very clear of what his position is, and he feels very strongly that when the national anthem plays, people should stand up.
Okay, and then the follow-up, wait a minute, I had a second question. I did have a second question. The second question was in regards to the private emails that have gone out. As the president admonished any of his staff on that, is he concerned about them using private emails for public business?
Yeah, the White House has been clear and instructs all staff to fully comply with Presidential Records Acts. All staff has been briefed on the need to preserve those records, and will continue to do so. Brian?
Cochran and the health.
We'll make this the last question because we're running tight on time.
You said about You had said about Senator Cochran and the health care vote that it was the White House's understanding that Senator Cochran was not able to physically be here this week. Well, Senator Cochran's office has said that there have been plans made for Senator Cochran to come to Washington if there was going to be a health care vote. Was the White House not aware that those plans had been made?
That was our understanding, as I said, that the senator was physically unable to be here this week. We're certainly glad that wasn't the case. Thanks so much, guys. We'll be in the office the rest of the day and happy to answer the rest of your questions.
Sarah, will you go to the Hefner's funeral? Forgot to ask. I'm sorry, man. That's not I did.
Hey there.